In the quiet outskirts of a town where time moved slower than the morning mist, Clara and Elias were a single heartbeat split between two bodies. Their childhood was a tapestry of shared secrets and golden afternoons spent under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. Elias would tuck his violin under his chin, his eyes closing as he coaxed melodies from the wood that seemed to mirror the very soul of the landscape. Clara was always there, sitting on the grass, her sketchbook open but her eyes fixed on him. She was his first audience, his most devoted critic, and his greatest champion. They promised each other that the world would one day hear what she heard, a genius that deserved a stage far larger than a dusty meadow. She believed in him with a ferocity that bordered on the sacred. But dreams require more than just talent. They require a relentless physical sacrifice. As they transitioned into adulthood, the heavy burden of those dreams fell quietly onto Clara's shoulders. She worked 2 exhausting jobs, her days a blurred cycle of waitressing at a greasy diner and scrubbing floors in the evening. Her hands, once soft and ready to hold a paintbrush, became rough and red from labor. Yet she never complained. Every cent she saved was a brick in the foundation of Elias's future. When the day finally came that Elias received a full scholarship to a prestigious conservatory in the city, they celebrated. To Clara, his success was the culmination of her own sweat and tears. They moved into a cramped, drafty apartment, fueled by the intoxicating hope that their struggles were finally ending. The city, however, had a different rhythm. It was a place of cold steel and relentless competition. As Elias immersed himself in the high-pressure world of classical music, a subtle shift began to occur. His focus, once wide enough to include Clara's dreams and her laughter, began to narrow until it was nothing but a needlepoint directed at his own hands. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The apartment, which was supposed to be their sanctuary, became a secondary rehearsal hall. The air was constantly filled with the frantic, repetitive scales of his violin, a sound that left no room for conversation or the soft scratching of Clara's own pens. Elias grew distant, not out of malice, but out of a consuming ambition that left no energy for anything else. He stopped asking Clara about her day, his mind already drifting to the next movement or audition. One evening, Clara returned home glowing with a rare spark of joy. She had been offered a small opportunity to showcase her artwork in a local community gallery, a tiny crack in the door she had kept shut for so long. She started to tell him, her voice trembling with excitement, but Elias didn't even look up from his sheet music. He cut her off mid-sentence, launching into a frustrated tirade about a difficult passage he couldn't master and the arrogance of his conductor. Clara's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. She stood in the kitchen, the news dying in her throat, realizing that her triumphs were invisible. Elias began to treat Clara's presence as a fixed constant, like the air he breathed, necessary but entirely ignored. He assumed she was happy simply because he was finally achieving the greatness they had both dreamed of. He failed to see the silent erosion of her spirit. To avoid distracting him from his genius, Clara began to hide her own aspirations, tucking her sketches away and silencing her own voice. She became a ghost in her own home, a shadow that moved quietly to ensure his tea was warm and his environment was silent. The vibrant girl from the Golden Meadows was being replaced by a hollow shell of service. One rainy Tuesday, while cleaning a forgotten corner of the bookshelf, Clara found an old leather-bound journal she had carried from their hometown. It was supposed to be the vessel for her stories, her thoughts, and her future. As she flipped through the pages, her heart sank. The first few chapters were filled with vivid descriptions of their love and her hopes for her own art. But then the entries stopped. She turned page after page of blank white paper. For over a year, she hadn't written a single word about her own life. She realized with a chilling clarity that she had stopped existing as an individual. She was no longer a partner. She was merely the stagehand for a play she was no longer allowed to star in. The silence of the apartment suddenly felt like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The city grew colder as winter approached, but the chill inside the apartment was more profound than any frost on the window pane. Elias's career had finally reached the precipice of true greatness. He had been selected for a world-renowned solo performance, an opportunity that most musicians only touched in their dreams. To Elias, this wasn't just a job, it was his entire identity. he was rarely home, spending 14 hours a day in rehearsal halls that smelled of old wood and ambition. When he did return, he brought music with him. He would sit in the corner of their dim, cramped living room, violin tucked firmly under his chin, his fingers moving with a frantic precision until they literally bled onto the strings. Clara spent her evenings in the silence that Elias left behind. She would sit at the small kitchen table, watching the clock tick on the wall, realizing that the space between them had become a vast, unbridgeable chasm. Even when he was physically present, he was emotionally miles away, lost in a world of sonatas where she didn't exist. She tried to reach out, to touch his hand, or offer a comforting word, but he would flinch and pull away, his tired mind still calculating the rhythm of a difficult bridge. The first true blow to her heart came during a prestigious gala held in his honor. Clara leaned forward from back of the room, her heart racing, expecting him to acknowledge the quiet sacrifice of her years spent working 2 jobs to pay his tuition. Instead, Elias spoke only of his own unwavering dedication and the lonely, hard work it took to master his craft. He thanked the conservatory and his mentors, but Clara's name never crossed his lips. She sat in the back of the hall, feeling her presence dissolve into the shadows. He hadn't forgotten her. He simply didn't see her as part of his victory. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was her birthday. She had prepared a small dinner, lighting a single candle on a cake she had baked herself. She waited. Hours passed until the front door finally creaked open. Elias entered, his face tight with fury from a failed rehearsal. He didn't see the candle or the carefully set table. He only saw a distraction. When Clara tried to welcome him, he snapped, his voice sharp and jagged. He shouted that her domesticities were suffocating his creative process. He didn't even remember what day it was. Clara didn't argue. She simply blew out the candle and retreated to hallway. She watched him as he resumed his practice, his silhouette jagged against the moonlight. She realized then that Elias wasn't a villain. He wasn't hurting her on purpose. It was worse. He had simply forgotten she existed as a person with needs and feelings. She was only a fixture in his environment. The man she had loved in the Golden Meadows had been consumed by the very genius she had helped nurture. Later that night, she tried one last time to speak, her voice a fragile whisper. She told him she was lonely, that she felt like she was disappearing. Elias didn't even put down his bow. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, coldly saying they would talk when the concert was over. He wasn't doing it for us. He was doing it for himself, and her role was to be the fuel that burned away to keep his fire going. While Elias eventually fell into a deep sleep, Clara moved with a quiet grace. She didn't cry. She packed a single suitcase. She walked to living room and placed her key on the table silently, right next to program for his upcoming solo concert. She took one last look at the man she had sacrificed everything for, realizing that to save herself, she had to leave. She stepped out into the cool, dark night, the door clicking shut behind her. The sun crawled across the floor of the apartment, but Elias did not wake to the smell of coffee or the soft sound of Clara moving through the kitchen. Initially, he felt a strange sense of relief. There would be no interruptions today, no quiet request for his attention, and no presence to balance against his music. He walked into the kitchen, expecting her at the table with her journal, but the table was bare, save for 2 items that sat in the center: her house key and the program for his upcoming solo debut. The silence of the apartment, which he had once craved, suddenly felt heavy, as if the oxygen had left with her. He searched the rooms for any sign of her. He opened her closet, only to find a void where her few dresses had hung. In the corner of the shelf, he found a small wooden box they had brought from their hometown. Inside were fragments of a life he had dismantled without even noticing. There were ticket stubs from their first movie and a small handheld recorder. He pressed play. The voice was his own, younger and brighter. In the recording, a teenage Elias laughed as he promised Clara that no matter how famous he became, she would always be the melody he played for. He promised he would never let her go. Hearing this, Elias finally saw the break. He hadn't just neglected her. He had overwritten the foundation of his own soul. The night of the grand concert arrived with a roar of expectation. The hall was filled with people eager to hear him play. Elias stood behind the curtain, his heart hammering. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding. He bowed to the crowd, but as he scanned the front row, his reserved seat for her sat empty. The velvet was cold and untouched. Throughout the performance, Elias played with a technical brilliance that left the critics breathless, but inside, he was a hollow man. During the final movement of the concerto, he realized the truth. He was performing for a world that knew his name but didn't know his heart, having pushed away the only person who truly did. Every note felt like a desperate apology directed at an empty chair. Success followed him like a shadow, but it was a bitter, flavorless thing. He became a star, his face on posters across the city, yet he spent his nights walking through their old favorite spots, hoping to hear the echo of her laugh. He visited their hometown meadows, but the wind offered no answers. Clara was gone, not just from his home, but from the orbit of his life. Months later, he saw a photograph of a gallery in a distant city. There, standing before a vibrant canvas of swirling golds and deep blues, was Clara. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and her eyes, which had been so dull in their apartment, were burning with a fierce, independent light. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile that he realized he hadn't seen in years. She had pursued the dream he had accidentally tried to stifle, and she had succeeded brilliantly without him. Elias realized then that he had broken her spirit by making his world too small for both of them to exist. He didn't call her or try to pull her back into his shadow. Instead, he sent a single anonymous bouquet of wildflowers to her gallery with a small note. It didn't ask for her return. It simply said, "I finally see you." He knew some things, once broken, heal in new shapes. The music he played from that day on was deeper, more soulful, but it carried the eternal echo of a lesson learned too late. Love does not die through grand betrayals, but through the slow, quiet neglect of the soul that walks beside you.